Hello and welcome to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, on this miserable Thursday morning, joined by Ben from WhoScored, and we've got Jonathan Wilson, as always, as well. We'll start with you, Ben. You've got to do the Champions League Team of the Week. You're very, very upset about the Champions League, but I'll let you do the Team of the Week before I ask you what I want to ask you.
Yeah, before we get into the bad stuff, we got Kepa in goal, back four of James, Upamecano, Deleted Davies, and a midfield of João Mario, Kimmich, Rafa and Musiala. And up front, you've got Kai Havertz and Gonçalo Ramos. Ramos earned a perfect 10, and he's actually the fifth player to receive a WhoScored 10 rating in a Champions League match this season, after Lewandowski and Dembele against Victoria Pilsen, and Messi and Mbappe against Maccabi Haifa.
Okay, Jonathan, that team full of Bayern Munich players, but actually, watching them last night, I know they won relatively comfortably in the end. They didn't look like Champions League winners to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the World Cup or what, but I just don't think there's any good teams about at the minute. No, really good teams. Napoli obviously are playing brilliantly, despite their defeat at the weekend. And maybe they're the best team in Europe at the moment. But the fact that they've never been in the quarterfinal before, I mean, we're assuming they'll get through against Eintracht Frankfurt next week. Maybe they're the favourites. I don't know. I mean, is this the year that City win it almost by default because they are decent without being anything like the level they've been at in the past? Real Madrid are very, very fallible. But yeah, I thought that Bayern PSG game, and Bayern were much, much better than PSG, but it wasn't a high quality game. I mean, yeah, they're in the quarterfinal. They're solid enough. Maybe they do sort of grind it through. But you look at how they're struggling domestically by their standards. There's not much fluency or much spark there. I know they've got the injuries to Mane, and having sold Lewandowski has reduced them. But neither of those two legs that I think was a particularly high quality game.
No, Champions League in knockouts, I'm used to it being high octane and electric, and I just sat there watching the Bayern game last night, and it just wasn't. But then I watched the last 10, 15 minutes of each half of the Tottenham game, Ben, and let me tell you, those two teams were electric compared to Spurs. You'd never have known that Spurs just needed one goal to stay in that tie, even with 10 men. They just looked like they weren't interested. It was really, really strange.
It's so miserable at Tottenham at the moment. All the fans are just... There's no real there's a real disconnect between the fans.
There was no atmosphere either. That was the knockouts of the Champions League. The ground was quiet.
I mean, the loudest it was is when Kulusevski got subbed off for Sanchez when Romero sent off, and the fans booed that decision, and rightly so. I mean, you're chasing the game. You need to get an equaliser to at least take it to extra time, and you take off an attacking player for Sanchez. Obviously, you don't want to be caught on the counter-attack, but you've got nothing to lose. And it was just a sub that kind of epitomised just how everything has gone to, awfully under Conte recently. And, he's got 12 games left in as Tottenham boss. Who knows if he'll see out those 12 games. And it's just a real disappointing end to what many thought would be a promising era under Conte.
Yeah, Jonathan, you kind of get the impression that this will be the last job Conte has in England.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it's definitely reaching the end game with Spurs. There's a sense that he doesn't want to be there. The players don't want him to be there. The fans don't want him to be there. So the question then, I guess, is how you manage the succession. Is it worth sacking before the end of the season to try and just get a little bit of uplift and get in the top four, or remain in the top four, remarkably? Or do you sort of think, well, yeah, he knows the squad, his professional pride will kick in and he will sort of drag them through. But yeah, when they're so up and down, Tottenham, you think this is a team that did beat Manchester City a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, the recent performances have been desperately flat. I suppose you even look at the Wolves game and say, well, the first half they were okay there, but the second half was so bad. And that's really been the problem for them all season. They can't put two good halves together. And then against Milan, there were no good halves.
Yeah, you expect to see something from Spurs. Even though they had 10 men, just that one goal deficit, you've got a chance to stay in the tie and take it to extra time. The substitution was absolutely bizarre. I think the commentator said that it epitomised what's going on at Tottenham at the moment, and they still got caught on the break. And anyway, Ben, so it was a very, very strange substitution, but it certainly feels like end of days for Conte and Tottenham, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in the summer and where they finish this Premier League season. Let's move on to the Premier League then, and it's Fulham v Arsenal this weekend, and we're going to start with a former Arsenal player, although the player, Jonathan, that played for Arsenal is very different for the one that's playing for Fulham and played for Chelsea. It's Willian up against one of his old teams, and 2 of his top 7 rated performances this season so far have come against his old team in Chelsea. So he's a player that Arsenal need to be wary of.
Yeah, he's been brilliant this season. I guess it's possibly plays on the right, not the left, which he did last week with Solomon on the other side rather than Bobby de Cordova-Reid. But he can play either. But his link up with Robinson down the left, I think, has been hugely impressive this season, and a huge part of Fulham's success. And I guess it's a lesson in why you shouldn't write players off after one bad season. Even a player in his 30s, he shouldn't think, he's finished, which is what I certainly did with Willian after his time at Arsenal. The fact that he was prepared to cancel the contract suggests he thought it was over. But then he's gone back to Brazil. He's had a restorative break, and he's back and looks as good as ever. And good Willian is a really, really good player. His days at Chelsea is crossing, his set play delivery, is running with the ball. Works hard, tracks the fullback. All of that is excellent. He's still doing that. So he's been I was very sceptical of that signing when it was made, but he's been excellent.
Yeah, Ben, Fulham's recruitment has kind of gone under the radar a little bit. It's a very mixed in terms of the type of player that they've gone for. But you think of Leno coming in from Arsenal, he's been excellent. Paulinho, we've waxed lyrical about in this podcast many times. I think he's been the signing of the season. And then they picked Willian up as well. Fulham have actually done some really good business.
Yeah, and you have to commend that given how they went about their business the last 2 times they were promoted and were relegated straight away. They kind of felt like a scattergun approach, but they made that big signing in Paulinho, which has been, the main one for them, the big one to improve their midfield. And so few teams, really did go all out to improve their midfield previously. Whereas looking at this in the last sort of 12, 18 months, Newcastle brought in Guimaraes, Man United brought in Casemiro, Tottenham to a lesser extent brought in Basuma, and Fulham signed Paulinho. So the teams are sort of realising how important, perhaps more so, that position is recently rather than in previous years. And, there feels like there's more of a plan in place for Fulham to not only stay up this season, but consolidate a Premier League spot for the future. Yeah,
and a signing I didn't mention there, Jonathan, was Manor Solomon. Can't stop scoring in the goals every week. He was scoring the same kind of goal every game, albeit on Monday against Brentford, it was a very different kind of goal, a poacher's finish reacting to the free kick. But again, another piece of what looks like good recruitment.
Yeah, I still think he's very one-footed. That'd be my one criticism of him. But at the minute, it doesn't seem to be mattering. It didn't matter for Ian Robin, who did a similar thing of always cutting inside. So, the fact he is so right-footed, I think that might stop him going to the very highest level. But he's playing brilliantly at the minute, and even if he only got one trick, if it's an effective trick, it doesn't really matter. So I think defenders will pretty quickly learn to show him on the outside, and that'll be the real test of him. Can he deal with that? But for now, he's proving incredibly effective. And I guess people would have seen him at Shakhtar, would have wondered, could he transfer that from Ukrainian league, from the occasional good performance in the Champions League to the Premier League? But so far, he absolutely has.
Yeah, and he's made an impact from the bench in a few games. He's in the team now. But Jonathan, someone else who's made a huge impact from the bench last week, Reece Nelson, scenes of jubilation in the 98th minute as he hammered home that late winner for Arsenal. Arsenal have got a few injuries starting to stack up in that attacking area now. So having someone like Reece Nelson to call upon, who maybe at the start of the season the Arsenal fans had maybe written off, they'd be glad to have him.
Definitely. I mean, he's one of those players who it feels like for almost a decade you've sort of heard about has been, he's the really good kid coming through. And then for injuries, one reason or another, it hasn't quite worked for him. It's always great to see something like that. Actually, it clicking for them. With Gabriel Jesus out, Trossard out, and Nketiah, I think it's only 50-50 for this game. So he probably will have to start. I guess probably means Martinelli playing through the middle. I mean, he did play a couple of games early in the season, and it started to look like he might have a role from the bench, but maybe his role's going to be more than that. And I think there is a pattern. Every now and again, you get a player who sort of comes in from the cold to have a decisive impact on the title race. You think of McAleer for Manchester United. You think of Christopher Wray even for Arsenal back in 97-8. And I'd sort of wondered whether Nketiah might be that figure, particularly when he got that goal late on against Manchester United. But maybe it's going to be Reece Nelson. The thing I worry about with Arsenal, I mean, it is partly depth of squad, obviously, but I know we've said this before, but I do sort of feel they might have gone into a sort of run-in mode too early. And I'm not sure how often you can get away with scoring 93rd, 97th minute winners against, with all respect to Villa and Bournemouth, not the top teams in the league. I wonder if they're burning through a lot of emotional energy. And I think this will be tough for them. I think Fulham are decent, and I think Arsenal are not quite the side they were early in the season. At the minute, the momentum's carrying them, but you sort of feel like the cartoon characters run off a cliff, and you're just sort of thinking, wow, they've got 12 games left. Are they going to look down at some point in that 12 games? And if they do, there might be problems. But it's why this has become, or is threatening to become, a really good running. That they are fallible, City are fallible, Manchester United, as we saw last Sunday, were very fallible. So it's not that sort of processional nature that we've seen the last sort of couple of months of the season in recent seasons. It feels like it could be a lot more twists.
Yeah, interesting game, this one as well. Craven Cottage, not an easy place to go, and Fulham a very different beast when Paulinho is in the team compared to when he's not, and I believe he's back from suspension for this one. Ben Zinchenko.
Paulinho's not back.
He's not back?
No, it's a 2-game ban.
I thought he'd had his 2 games.
No,
no.
FA Cup doesn't count, so he's suspended for this one.
Oh, João Paulinho. I want to see you playing again. I want to see you making slide tackles after 30 seconds and then having to walk a tightrope for the rest of the game. Come on, João Paulinho. And by the way, Jonathan, absolutely naughty knowledge talking about Christopher Wray. Unbelievable. I've forgotten he even existed before you just brought him up.
I'm just an old man. I just remember 1998 much easier than last week.
Yeah, I mean, I remember 97, 98 very, very well, but I'd completely forgotten Christopher.
Is he the greatest Liberian to play in the Premier League?
He's the second best, isn't he? He's the second best. George played there. George Ware played, didn't he?
Yeah, he didn't play very well in the Premier League, did he?
No, but I remember watching him live against Villa for in a 0-0 game, Aston Villa against Chelsea back in the day as well. Exceptional. Love that. Bit of Premier League years from Jonathan Wilson. Zinchenko then, Ben. Jesus was probably the one that created a bit more furore when they brought him in. But Zinchenko, I mean, I'm saying Paulinho's been the signing of the season in the Premier League. There's an argument for Zinchenko being the signing of the season across the whole Premier League as well. And I think if Man City could turn back time, I'm not sure they'd sell him.
Yeah, I mean, the fact they got, obviously, hindsight 2020, if they knew they would get rid of Cancelo in January, they probably would have kept Zinchenko. But, I mean, Jesus was obviously the priority signing for Arsenal. They lost Aubameyang in January, and then Lacazette had left as well. So it left them just Nketiah, who obviously had that long-term deal, but that was more, he kind of felt that was more out of necessity, just as more of a backup in case Jesus didn't sign. But Zinchenko, I said back in the summer, he was the signing I really like for Arsenal, and that hasn't changed. He offers them that control down that left. He helps overload down the left flank. I mean, the fact that he ranks so highly for passes per 90, a metric usually dominated by centre-backs or ball-playing midfielders, speaks volumes about his dominance in that midfield, the influence he's had down that left flank. And, you know, without Jesus, Arsenal have muddled through. Admittedly, they were better with Jesus. He allowed Martinelli and Saka to flourish, but with Nketiah and Trossard prior to his injury, they were able to, get the results they needed. There was performance levels did dip, but they got the results. With Zinchenko, they just lacked that. They lacked the control down that left, and I think if they do go on to win the Premier League, he will be probably, in my opinion, the most important player behind it.
Yeah, he's been an incredible leader as well as Zinchenko. He's been really, really good for Arsenal. And I think not only because Man City are short of left backs, but just because I think of the impact he's had on Arsenal as well. That's another reason why I think if they could turn back time, City may not let him go to Arsenal. What if you made of Bernd Leno? He obviously left Arsenal to go to Fulham, Jonathan. What if you made of him this season? Because he's been up there as one of the top performers in terms of goalkeeper, purely on the eye test. We'll come to the who scored stuff in a minute, but on the eye test, Leno's having a good season.
Yeah, he's been very good. And again, I think, it's particularly with goalkeepers, maybe it's very easy to remember a couple of high-profile mistakes and write them off. I think, you can say something similar for Fabianski, that until his injury, he'd had a pretty good season, or pretty good 2 seasons for West Ham. And I think he'd been written off a bit after his time at Arsenal. So Leno, I sort of think, he got that injury at Brighton, didn't he, when he was sort of in the air and was sort of flipped over. And I think when he came back after that, his form wasn't quite what it had been. But he looks back to his best now. Whether he's a higher level in Fulham, maybe not, but he's playing really, really well for Fulham. And for goalkeepers, there are only sort of 5 or 6 really high level slots. So he's definitely in that tier, just below that, and maybe could push back into that level. But at the moment, I'd assume he's perfectly happy playing well at Fulham.
Yeah, that was the injury, of course, at Brighton all those years ago that set off a trend that saw Argentina win the World Cup, Jonathan. I don't know whether you know that. It was all because of that injury.
Because Martinez came in and...
Yeah, everything just fell into place from there. He played for Arsenal, went to Villa, played first team football every week, got in the Argentina team, won them the World Cup.
Cheated in penalty shootouts, and the rest is history.
Technically didn't cheat, Jonathan. He'd be cheating if he did it now, but it wasn't cheating at the time of the penalty shootouts. Ben, let's look at the head-to-head then between Leno and Ramsdale. Who's coming out on top?
So Ramsdale has kept more clean sheets with 11 to Leno's 7 and has conceded fewer goals, 25 to Leno's 32. However, Leno has been the busier of 2 goalkeepers, averaging 4 saves per 90 to Ramsdale's 2.3. And does have one of the better save success rates in the Premier League at 74.4%. He hasn't committed an error leading to a goal, whereas one of the 25 Ramsdale has conceded has been directly due to an error. As such, Leno's WhoScored rating is 7.04, which is actually level with David Raya as the best in the Premier League, whereas Ramsdale's is much lower at 6.64.
So I would assume then that Leno is in the combined 11, Ben?
Correct.
Go on and run me through it.
So we obviously have Leno in goal. It's a 4-3-3. So we've got Tete, Gabriel, Riemann, Zinchenko at the back. Midfield 3 of Ødegaard, Partey, Xhaka. And then up front it's Saka, Mitrovic, Martinelli.
And of course, we can't take that team seriously at all because João Paulinho is not in there, Ben. Or is that because he's missing at the weekend?
That's because he's missing.
Couldn't pick him. Would he have been in there if he wasn't missing at the weekend?
He would have been in place of Xhaka.
Okay.
So it would have been a 4-2-3-1 with Ødegaard pushed further forward.
Okay. Jonathan, is that anywhere near the combined 11 that you've picked?
It's not far off. I've basically gone Arsenal, but Mitrovic is centre forward. So 10 Arsenal players. But that's just because I like units. I completely see why you'd want Tete, not White. But, White is used to playing in that back 4. I can see that Reams had a good season, but I'd rather keep Saliba and Gabriel together. If Paulinho were available, then, I'd definitely consider him in for Xhaka, but Xhaka and Partey and Ødegaard have been a very, very good midfield. So I'm quite happy with my 4-3-3. And Mitrovic, I'm only picking because of injuries. I would have Gabriel Jesus I'd probably have him ahead of Nketiah, but were Gabriel Jesus fit, I would have Gabriel Jesus and have 11 Arsenal players.
I'm going to do some combined 11s as well. I want to join in. If I left out the combined 11s, and I just want to have a go. So next week I'm going to get involved and do them for the games that we do. Predictions then, Jonathan. I'll come to you first. Fulham v Arsenal.
With no great confidence, Arsenal to win 1-0, but I think this is a real test for them. I can see Fulham taking points off them. If Paulinho were fit, then not were fit, were available, then I'd be very tempted to go for a draw, but I'm going Arsenal to win 1-0.
Yeah, the Paulinho The Paulinho factor is massive. So I think Arsenal will win 2-1. Ben?
Yeah, agreed on the Paulinho factor too. So I think Arsenal win 2-1 as well.
2-1 as well. This is, of course, the Lewis Boa-Morte derby. Let's move on then to Manchester United against Southampton. And Jonathan, you've touched on it. What on earth happened to Manchester United last week?
I mean, very, very strange. I think it's the one thing I'd say was sitting in the stadium, although it was obviously kind of a very odd second half. It wasn't like when Germany beat Brazil in 2014. It wasn't a case of everybody sitting there open mouth thinking, what is happening? What's going on? There wasn't a sense that the laws of football, everything we understood about the game being ripped up. Maybe that was because the collapse came second half, not first half. So, yeah, you weren't thinking, Christ, could this be 10, 12, 15-0? And I think maybe that's because we've got the memory of the 4-0 and the 5-0 last season that we sort of used to seeing Liverpool outplaying United. So I think in that sense, it was just a reminder of what United were not that long ago. I think more immediately it was probably, and this is an explanation rather than an excuse, I think they were disgracefully bad second half. But I think the fact that they have played so many games recently, the fact that they've had that sort of expenditure of emotional energy in beating Barcelona, which is probably the most significant game of the season so far. Yeah, to play the team top in Spain and beat them much more comfortably than the 2-1 or 4-3 aggregate scoreline suggests. To win the League Cup, to end that six-year drought. I mean, you and I would dream of a 6-year drought, but for United, 6 years is a long time without a trophy. To then have the FA Cup tie against West Ham, where they were behind but came back. I can see all of those are wearying factors, so that when the dam bursts, it suddenly bursts. But still, when Ten Hag spoke of a lack of professionalism, that totally chimed with my sense of you can't switch off like that. You can't go as Bruno Fernandes did, as Anthony did. You can't just sort of shrug and stop tracking your man. And Luke Shaw ended up having a terrible game. That was partly because he wasn't protected. And there was a little bit of a case of everything Liverpool hit went in. And they'd been on the reverse side of that, I think, in the 5-2 defeat to Real Madrid. I don't think that was as bad as people suggested at the time. Pretty much everything Real Madrid hit that day went in. I think Liverpool actually had more shots than Real Madrid that day. And here, I think there was 8 shots on target, 7 of them went in. So it was, I know Gary Neville kept on using the word freakish, and I sort of want to avoid that word because I don't think it was entirely freakish. But it also was a 7-0 that sort of felt a bit more like a 4-0, which is bad enough. But I think it probably was of more significance for Liverpool season than for Manchester United. I think United should be able to come back from it in some ways, although I think it ends any sense they might be in a title race. It might be a useful thing for clearing heads and sort of resetting and saying, look, there's no shortcuts here. We're not actually that good. We've got to go back to basics. We can't let things slip, even if we have had that success recently. The thing Alex Ferguson always said, Ferguson teams suffered some big defeats. They conceded 5 at Newcastle, 6 at Southampton, 6 at Manchester City, and Ferguson's thing was always you can get over. The important thing isn't so much for defeat; it's how you respond to it. And United this season, 6 league defeats, and they've 5 of those they won the next game. So they haven't lost any of them 7-0, admittedly, but I think they'll. Yeah, they shouldn't be knocked too far, of course. And the fact they've got Southampton at home, which is pretty much as easy as the Premier League gets at the minute, I think they'll be fine.
Very kind of you not to include Ben in the 6-year trophy drought comment that you made. He'd kill for a 6-year trophy drought. you should be including him. I'm not having that down to just me and you. Ben Fernandes came under fire for his, well, not so much for his performance, although his performance wasn't great, more his attitude on Sunday. What have WhoScored come up with for his performance?
So it was the 3rd worst rated Premier League start of his career, behind the Crystal Palace defeat on the final day of the Rangnick era, and behind one of the 3 Man City ones in this top 10. He had a WhoScored rating of 5.82, which, as said, was the 3rd worst rated of his start, but in turn, the only time he has earned a perfect WhoScored 10 rating in a Premier League match from the start was at home against Saints. So take that how you will.
Well, Jonathan, I thought the criticism after the game was a little bit strange because they lost 7-0, yes. That's not all on Bruno Fernandes. And also, just behaving in the way he normally behaves on a football pitch. I don't think he did anything massively different to what he normally does. They just lost 7-0 and he was captain.
I think it's a bit more than that. I think it's a pretty bad look when it was in the build-up to the 7th goal, sort of the phase before the phase that Liverpool got the 7th from. And Bajcetic went past him. And he was maybe a little bit unlucky. He was right underneath the press box. It was really obvious to all of us what had happened. The bike just went by him, and rather than chasing him, he just sort of turns away and shrugs and walks off. You can't be doing that. You can't be doing that.
I did not say that bit.
You can't be doing that, whoever you are, but you certainly can't be doing that as captain. There was the incident where he sort of gave a linesman a little shove, which I don't think it's the worst crime in the world. I don't think it was sort of it wasn't like Paolo Di Canio on Paul Alcock, if we're going Premier League years.
Oh, Jonathan, you are prime Premier League years today.
I'm pre-Premier League years, to be honest. I'm an 80s man. But at the same time, you shouldn't be going about touching match officials. And I think on another day, you might have gotten a bit of trouble for that. And he's always had that petulant side to his personality. Barney Monet made the point that he's got a petulant face, that he just looks like a whiny little kid. And that probably doesn't help. And to an extent, a lot of players are whiny little kids. Jordan Henderson whines a lot. It's not the worst thing in the world, but Jordan Henderson's whining tends to be directed externally rather than internally. And when he's talking to his own team, it's to G them up rather than to moan at them. So Ten Hag said this week that Fernandes will remain vice-captain, and obviously because Harry Maguire's not playing, that means he's the captain. And I guess that probably is the right thing to do, but he can't down tools by that again, I don't think. I think that's probably a final warning for him. But he must know that as well. He must know that you can't behave like that. That you can't show that lack of professionalism. It's only one step removed from walking off a pitch, getting in your car and driving home, as another Manchester United Portuguese superstar did earlier this season. So, I think it was a reminder of the environmental issues, shall we say, that United have suffered recently, that they haven't entirely been extirpated.
Yeah, that Portuguese player that you talk about has wore the armband this season as well. Feels like it was about 10 years ago, but he's wore the armband this season as well. The poison chalice of the Manchester United captain's armband. Ben, Southampton, signs of life, and you actually think they've been a little bit unlucky this season in some respects?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the last 9 Premier League games, and 8 have been decided by 1 goal. Admittedly, they won 3 of those by a single goal when they beat Everton, Chelsea and Leicester. Leicester, they were lucky against Suter, hit the crossbar really late on after Bazunu misjudged that cross into the box. I mean, since the Nathan Jones era ended,
we missed that. Southampton were far more entertaining when Nathan Jones was manager. This new guy does not say enough for my liking.
He needs to do more. That's for sure. I mean, maybe we can get Nathan Jones over to the box and we can try and coax. That would be the dream. There are signs of recovery. They do look more compact. The signings that they made in January have done well. I do like Onuachu and Suleimana. I think there's a good big man, little man combination up there. They do, obviously, they look dead and buried for a period, but 2 wins in 3. They're now 1 point of getting out of the relegation zone. And admittedly, this game probably comes at a bad time for them, but United coming off the back of a 7-0 defeat, there's as good a time as any to face them, you feel.
Relegation battle's really hotting up. Jonathan, I know you said about Arsenal getting too geared for the running earlier on in the show, but it is tight down there in that bottom half of the table.
Yeah, is it 9 teams within 7 points of the bottom there?
Yeah, there's kind of 3 leagues at the moment, isn't there? You've got the top 10. Villa in their own league in 11th. Villa just can't be anything but 11th this season. And then the league underneath.
I don't think Southampton have been unlucky at all. I think they're awful. So in the 10 games since the World Cup, they've had the better XG in 1 of them. So if you assume where the XG is within half a goal, that should be a draw. They should have, the XG suggests they should have picked up 6 points. They picked up 12. So they're actually 6 points above where they should be. I think they're by far the worst team in the Premier League. And so the only game where they've had the better XG was against Wolves, where they lost. So yeah, I look, they have tightened up the last 3 games. The last 2 games, the XG was a draw, but they took 3 points in that rather than 2. So even that, they're outperforming. So I've got very little faith in them at the moment.
Jonathan's fought back at you there, Ben. Have you got a reply to that?
No, that's me done. I'm actually leave now.
Just have a bit of Bruno Fernandes petulance from Ben there. Just accepted it.
That's it. I'm done.
This is the kind of attitude that Spurs had last night, Ben, just not trying, and then they're knocked out of the Champions League. You've not even tried to fight back.
I'm too tired. I'm too tired of Tottenham. I'm too tired of everything.
Too tired of life. We do record this podcast very early on a Thursday. It is a tiring thing getting up early to do a podcast. Everyone's heart's bleeding here, I'm sure. Jonathan.
Heart's really bleeding for you. What time are you up this morning?
About 5 to 8, 5 minutes before the podcast.
Yeah, so I've been up since 4:45. Ben's been up since 3. So
what was Ben up till? What were you up till 3? What were you? Kids. Not crying about Tottenham.
No, they were crying about scaring each other by mistake.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't. Well, yeah. Okay. Apologies. But, yeah, I don't like getting up in the morning. That's the main problem for me. Jonathan, James Ward-Prowse, one short of the Premier League free kick record. But if Southampton do go down, where would you see him ending up? What's his level if he were to leave Southampton?
It's probably in that sort of 7th to 10th bracket. I don't think he's quite, a Manchester City player or actually, maybe I'm overrating the likes of Tottenham. I think he'd do a perfectly good job at Tottenham or even Arsenal. But I think he's more. Maybe Newcastle could bring him in. But he's not a Manchester City, Liverpool style midfielder or perhaps quality midfielder. But he's clearly leaving if Southampton go down. It'd be absurd for him to play in the Championship. So I'm pretty sure he will take that free kick record because I think he will spend most of the rest of his career in the Premier League. So, the only issue is age. How old is he? 27?
28.
Yeah. 28.
So he's not a young player you bring in as part of the project, but he's clearly, not just a set plays. He's clearly a quality player, and the thing is, he can play deep in midfield as he tends to, but when he does play a slightly more advanced role, as he did, I think, away at Everton this season, he looks very dangerous doing that. So, he's a very versatile midfielder. So, having initially said there that I thought he's probably a one tier off the top, I could see going at Arsenal actually do a really good job as cover for Odegaard or for Xhaka. You can do both of those roles. So you could, a squad player for a real top side or a regular for a team one below that, but certainly a higher level than Southampton.
I actually could see him at Liverpool. Their midfield needs a complete rebuild in the summer. I could see him coming in and maybe not being someone that starts every week, but being a very useful option for Liverpool in there. But yeah, I take your point though. I don't think he's an elite level midfielder, but he'd certainly get himself a big move. I would say.
The only reason I don't think he's stylistically right for City or Liverpool. This might be that just we haven't seen it, but he hasn't really played in a properly hard pressing team. And that might be just the nature of Southampton is that they don't press that hard. I suppose they did to an extent the Hasenhüttl, but maybe he could be a sort of the Milner replacement at Liverpool as the wise older head.
Milner / Henderson. I was thinking, did he not? Did he play for Southampton? Am I imagining that?
Was he there then? Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, well maybe.
Hasenhüttl did press, so he has done it under Hasenhüttl, to be fair.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I think even if Southampton were to stay up, I think Ward-Prowse, it's probably time for a refresh, time for a change. He's been to Southampton a long time. I'd be interested to see him at a higher level. Be interesting to see what happens with him in the summer. Let's finish this section with our predictions then. Ben, you can go first. Manchester United v Southampton.
Yeah, so interestingly, 5 of Man United's 6 defeats this season have been followed by 2-1 win for United, which I don't think they'll win 2-1. I think they'll do better and win 3-0.
I actually was going to predict 2-1 before you said that, so I'm definitely going to stick with that now. Jonathan?
2-0 to United.
2-0 to Manchester United. We'll finish then with the just a minute section. And before we do that, Ben, I don't know whether you watched last week because you weren't on. I asked for a league table of the predictions. Has any of the 3 of you that have been on the podcast in recent weeks provided me with that?
Nope. Short answer, no. Bruno Fernandes, I'm off again.
Absolute disgrace.
I've made a judgment call and I'm doing an Eredivisie 2019-20 and I'm freezing it and Jonathan wins. So well done, Jonathan.
Jonathan, are you happy with that?
Well, you take the victories where you get them, and were Manchester City to be stripped of the 2014 Carabao Cup, I would happily accept that as a Sunderland trophy. But it's not the way you want to win it. Put it that way.
I'm not congratulating anyone. I think that's an absolute disgrace from Who Scored. But yeah, we'll do the just a minute section anyway. I mean, actually, I might not introduce it. I can't be bothered. What's the point? I can't be bothered to introduce it. But I will, because I'm a professional, unlike anyone at Who Scored Towers. Jonathan, Bournemouth against Liverpool for you.
Well, I'm going for this to be a 38-12 win for Bournemouth, because what's the point? Yeah, Liverpool up to 5th now after that 7-0 win over United. 3 points behind Spurs with a game in hand, and given how Spurs are going, you imagine they will be able to catch that up. The only thing you'd say about them is that 34% of the goals they've scored in the league this season have come in 2 games, and one of those 2 games was against Bournemouth in that home game. They won 9-0. Bournemouth really struggling at the minute, 1 point from safety. Although I think there is a sense that their form has slightly improved. They've only taken 4 points in the last 5 games. It was a very late goal that beat them against Brighton. They got a draw against Newcastle. They won at Wolves and losses to City and Arsenal, nothing to be ashamed of. I think the key for Liverpool recently with their upturn in form, the Real Madrid game excluded, is that they've kept 5 clean sheets in a row in the league. And in its own way, I think that Real Madrid game was as freakish as the United game, that a lot of shots went in that day. Bournemouth got 8 players out of doubtful. Liverpool, no Diaz, no Thiago. Doubts over Keita and Gomez. I've got them to win 2-0.
I'm going to go 3-1 to Liverpool. Ben?
3-0 to Liverpool.
3-0 to Liverpool. Ben, you've got Newcastle against Wolves. I'm just abandoning the order of the script. I've just gone to your 4th game, just out of sheer spite. Newcastle v Wolves for you, Ben.
I might just start on a completely different game and then take it from there. Newcastle were unable to bounce back from their disappointing Carabao Cup loss to Manchester United last weekend as they lost 2-0 to Manchester City. Magpies are now winless in 5 and they scored 2 goals in that run to slip 4 points off the top 4. The Magpies are unbeaten in 3 at home against Sunday's opponents Wolves, and Eddie Howe will seek to maintain that record without Ryan Fraser, Emil Krab and Joe Linton, the latter absent owing to a ban, while Fabian Schär is to be assessed after he suffered a light concussion in the Carabao Cup final. Wolves ended a 3-game winless run with a 1-0 victory over Tottenham last weekend. They required an inspired Jose Sarr to secure a massive 3 points. They've collected just 10 points from 13 away matches this season, though 9 of those have come in their last 7 games on the road. Julian Lopetegui is unable to call upon Sasha Kaladzic, Diego Costa, Chiquinho and Chigo Bueno for Sunday's trip to St James's Park, but Boubacar Traore and Hwang Hee-chan may be available for selection. Pedro Neto made his first start since September against Spurs last weekend, and his return to fitness is a huge boost for Wolves, while Adama Traore scored the winner in that game and is pushing for a start. However, I think this one will end 1-1.
I'm going to go for 1-0 to Newcastle. Jonathan?
Yeah, so that 1-0 to Newcastle.
1-0 to Newcastle. Jonathan, you've got Leeds v Brighton next.
Oh, thank you for keeping the order for me.
You've done nothing wrong, Jonathan.
Oh, that's very kind. Leeds, 4th bottom, level with Everton, who are 3rd bottom. So they're still in big trouble. They only won of the last 12, and critically, they've failed to score in 5 of the last 7. Only 2 of those games have been under Javi Gracia, after he succeeded Jesse Marsh. And under Gracia, they've won 1 game 1-0. They've lost one game 1-0. I think there has been a sense that at least they're slightly tight with the back under him. Brighton in great form, definitely eyeing European football. They've won 7 of the last 10 in all competitions. And bad news for Leeds, given how they're struggling to score. Brighton have only conceded 2 of the last 5 games. Moda, Colwell, Lallana are out for Brighton. Tag Lamptey is a doubt. Leeds are without Rodrigo, Dallas and Forshaw, and there's doubts of Sinisterra, Cooper and Bamford. Brighton won 1-0 at the Amex this season, and I think they're going to repeat that. 1-0 to Brighton.
Sorry, I've done a bit of a podcast throwback, a bit of a Josh Wright. I've been distracted by looking out the window because it's absolutely pelting it down with snow here, and I live on a new estate, so there's still houses being built, and the people are still working. I cannot believe that they're there building
houses there as well.
That's the kind of work rate you're looking for, isn't it?
Oh, where should we go for Ben now? He doesn't know where I'm going to go with this. Everton, Brentford, Ben.
Can I just put my prediction as 2-0 to Brighton? Well, still doing
sorry. Sorry, I was looking out the window. Predictions, you've gone 2-0 Brighton. What was Jonathan?
I said 1-0 Brighton.
1-0 to Brighton. 2-1 to Brighton. Oh, that's a nice noise. Ben, I was going to go Everton, Brentford, but now I'm going to go Crystal Palace, Man City for you.
Crystal Palace's 1-0 loss at Aston Villa last week extended their winless run to 9 games. The Eagles are the only team yet to win a Premier League game in 2023, and Patrick Vieira's side are slipping towards the relegation zone. While they do remain 5 points above the bottom three. That gap will narrow if they continue to slide. Cheikh Doucouré, is suspended for Palace following his second half red card at Aston Villa last week, while Nathan Ferguson and Sam Johnston remain out, though neither player would have started fit. Manchester City made it 4 wins from their last 5 with a routine 2-0 victory over Newcastle last weekend to remain in the coattails of league leaders Arsenal. They're in action Saturday night, so we'll seek to put pressure on the Gunners with another 3 points at Selhurst Park. City are unbeaten on their last 8 trips to Palace and have kept a clean sheet in 5 of their last 6 in South London. Phil Foden is the only injury concern for Pep Guardiola for the weekend's game, and the England international will be assessed ahead of this one. I think Palace's poor record in 2023 will continue, with City to win 2-0.
2-0. I'm going to go 2-1 Man City. Jonathan?
2-0.
2-0 to Man City, yep. Yeah. I mean, Cheikh Doucouré should be banned for as many games as Boubacar Kamara is injured for Aston Villa. That's how I believe the rules should be applied. John gets Chelsea.
Leicester 15th, and they had seemed to be on an upward curve with wins over Villa and Spurs. We've lost 3 in a row since then, losing to United when they actually played all right for sort of 20 minutes, half an hour that game. Now a defeat to Arsenal. Nothing too much to worry about there, but the defeat to Southampton I think would be worrying, even if they probably think the XG suggests they had the better of that game, as well as winning 1-0. Southampton did miss a penalty. Chelsea sort of floating around mid-table. Before Tuesday, they only scored 5 goals in 14 this season. Tuesday was the first time against Dortmund, was the first time they'd scored 2 in a game this year. They've only had 3 away wins all season. But Leicester have a second worst defence in the league. So against Chelsea, you have a 6th worst attack. That might be just what they need to open the floodgates. However, I don't think it's going to be high scoring. Chelsea won 2-1 at the bridge. I've got them to win this one 1-0.
I'm going to go for 1-1. Ben?
1-0 to Chelsea as well.
Right then, Ben. Everton v Brentford.
Everton were twice pegged back by Nottingham Forest at the City Ground on Sunday as they shared the spoils in a 2-2 draw Steve Cooper's side. The stalemate extended the Toffees' winless run to 3 matches, and they remain in the relegation zone, albeit on goal difference only. Sean Dyche could welcome 3 players back into the fold for Saturday's welcome with Brentford, with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Nathan Patterson and Vitali Michaelenko all close to a return to fitness, but Andros Townsend is absent for the home side. Brentford earned the West London bragging rights on Monday night as they beat Fulham 3-2 to extend their unbeaten run to 12 matches. With the European spot in their sights, Thomas Frank will be keen to keep the streak going at Everton's expense. Thomas Strakosha is the only confirmed absentee for Frank for Brentford's trip to Goodison Park, though he was unlikely to have featured a fit anyway. And the Beast Boss has plenty of options all across the pitch. Brentford won this game last season, and another win to extend their unbeaten streak wouldn't be a surprise, and I believe Brentford will win 2-1.
2-1. I'm going to go 3-0 Brentford. Jonathan?
1-1.
1-1. Quiz question. Who knows who the last manager was to beat Thomas Frank's Brentford in the Premier League?
Was it Gerrard?
No, it was the stand-in for Gerrard between Gerrard and Emery. I can't remember his name.
Aaron Danks was the last manager to win in the Premier League against Thomas Frank's Brentford. What did you say, Jonathan? Did you know
said Emery? So I remembered it was Villa, but I'd forgotten the Danks into Regnum.
That's what we did. The 2 games, won a game 4-0, lost a game 4-0. Peak Villa. You've got Villa now, Jonathan. West Ham against Villa. Yeah,
West Ham in real bother in this big relegation fight we've been talking about. They're only 1 point off relegation zone. They've only won 2 of the last 12. The 4-0 win over Forest, where they got 4 goals in less than 20 minutes. That was immediately offset by a 4-0 defeat to Brighton when the fans really turned on Moyes and on the side. They've got the Conference League away tonight against Ike of Larnaca in Cyprus, which is never easy to come back from that to a Sunday game. Villa, having let in 11 in 3 straight defeats, have had wins against Everton and Crystal Palace with clean sheets. I think there's been a conscious tightening up there that's been hugely significant. A lot of injuries to both sides. Coutinho, Diego Carlos, Dendoncker, Boubacar Kamara, all out for Villa. Fabianski, Kufal, Antonio, Kerr and Cornet. Fabianski's out, the others are all doubts for West Ham. West Ham won this 1-0 at Villa Park, and I think they might just have enough to do the same here. So I'm going to say West Ham to win 1-0.
Well, they're up against Villa, who've got the joint best away record since Unai Emery has come in. So I'm going to say Villa are going to win 2-1. Ben?
1-0.
1-0. There you go. Nice spread. There, Ben, your final game is your beloved Tottenham Hotspur against Nottingham Forest.
Tottenham have been poor of late, losing 4 of the last 7, though all 4 of those losses came away from home. Back on home turf, Spurs have won their last 3 in the league and kept a clean sheet in victories over Manchester City, West Ham and Chelsea. However, with Antonio Conte back in the dugout, there isn't much hope for a rejuvenated North London side for Saturday's welcome of Nottingham Forest, as was proved against AC Milan on Wednesday night. Conte is again without injured quartet Hugo Lloris, Yves Bissouma, Rodrigo Bentancur and Ryan Sessegnon, but Eric Dyer returns from a midweek ban, having missed the Champions League welcome for AC Milan. Nottingham Forest were able to extend their home unbeaten onto 9 matches as they twice came from behind to draw 2-2 with Everton. However, their away form has been far from impressive, with Steve Cooper overseeing just 1 victory on the road in 22-23. Cooper is without no fewer than 8 players for Saturday's trip to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, including first-choice centre-back Scott McKenna and Willy Bolly. Dean Henderson's among those ruled out, though Keylor Navas is a more than capable stand-in. Forest do have the worst away record in the division, and it remains to be seen whether they will win here, but I think they will get a draw and it'll finish 1-1.
2-0 Spurs.
I'm going to go 2-0 to Spurs as well, I think. Not that it matters because we've got no league table anymore. And that is the end of the podcast. Not forever, well, hopefully not forever, but the end for this week's edition of the Edge of the Box podcast. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel with your post notifications on so you know exactly when our next video is coming. Thanks to Jonathan Wilson for joining us on today's podcast. I'm not going to thank you, Ben, because quite frankly, you've ruined my Thursday by binning the Predictions League. As I say, we'll be back next week. Enjoy all the weekend's football and as ever, stay safe.